Jedd Fish has some big plans in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all day, every day today. We're going to talk about a curious, I'll use that term for the time being, because I have some very strong opinions on the matter. Article that Jon Wilner wrote saying that Washington isn't anywhere close to being relevant among some of the top schools in the Big Ten. We're going to talk about three-star running back Quaid Carr, who decided to join Washington's 2025 class, which was curious. We discussed it on the show as he decommitted from San Diego State. We want to make sure we dive into that one way more, but we got to get into Washington's transfer portal plans, because Jedd Fish said that they're going to be taking 10 to 12 players from the portal, and it's going to look a lot different than it did last season, or coming into this season, I should say. Just a reminder to all the everydayers out there, by the way, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you get this podcast, like, comment, make sure you leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. It does all help us out a lot. But Lars, like I said, Jedd Fish said he's going to take 10 to 12 players in the transfer portal. And I feel like, because we don't obviously know all the players that are going to be coming in, there aren't that many that have declared for the portal just yet, but we know what positions they might be at.
Right. And I mean, that was when I remember looking over at you during the press conference on Monday and saying, because I have some notes in my, Word document. I'm like, okay, here's the questions we should ask Jedd. We'll see which ones we can kind of get to. I ended up framing the question, what does this bye week allow you to do? And Jedd basically just kind of rambled into, with the, bye week and then Oregon and then the first signing day and then the December 9th is when the portal opens. We kind of got to plan things out here. And I have to imagine he already knows who's mostly coming back and who's not. We already made the public declaration for the most part about Jonah Coleman. I mentioned to you, Sebastian Valdez posted this is his final home game at Husky Stadium. Again, posts don't always mean anything. But I think the key that you hit on there is which positions. And I think that's kind of, we know it's going to be defensive tackle, probably nose tackle, defensive, whichever one you want to say there. The question is, do you get 2 there? Do you get 3? How many do you get there? Offensive line, you probably want 1, maybe 2, just in terms of let's kind of smooth things over, especially depending on how the high school class goes, in terms of who ends up signing and enrolling early. And then on top of that, that's when, when he said 10 to 12, it's like, okay, what are the other positions? Because the more you think about it, probably tight end, that's 1 at least. And then you kind of just have to imagine, because here's what kind of caught me a little bit. It's like, you're looking at this and saying, unlike last year, as you mentioned, you're trying to get impact guys. You're not trying to get, necessarily, no offense to Hayden Moore, where it's almost like draft and develop, sign out of the portal and develop over 2 or 3 years. You're going to need guys that are coming in instantly saying, plug and play here, plug and play here. Are you going to get a replacement for Enoch? Are you going to get a replacement for Landon's a replacement for D'Angelo, so you don't really need to do that. But do you add another, right guard to the mix because you look at that position battle and say, well, if guard comes back, do you slide Henning in there? There's so many other options you can go with. It's just a question of you don't really want to bank on that too much. And that's why the number is 10 to 12 versus, 20, 30, whatever. Because, again, right now you don't know who's in the portal. I mean, maybe the coaches, you always hear things and stuff like that. But it's like it's even worse than going into free agency, because in free agency, the guys whose contracts are up. You know what their contract situation is. Here, it's like, they even released him right before the free agency started.
So, Lars, all right, I got to stop you because I'm really glad you used the term free agency, because we got a question on YouTube from one of our fantastic everydayers who says, you might also educate us on the transfer portal process itself. Example, how often the portal opens and for how long. Presume we have at least one combine. I'm old and new to the system. Just a little bit of question for some of our viewers out there. So 30-second transfer portal explanation for the time being for where we are. Basically, it is free agency. A college player is not happy with where they are. They can choose to enter the transfer portal, feel out, whether it be for one reason or another. There are a million different reasons why these kids choose to do it. So that's why it's one of the big reasons you and I don't yet know who might do that. They always declare, we're going to hear a whole lot more. Let's call it over the next 2 weeks because the portal opens on December 9th. So before that date, we're probably going to hear, oh, this player wants to do it. This player's not happy with, their playing time. This player was promised X and isn't getting that. So a lot of that, those are all the reasons people want to enter the portal. But aside from that point, when I look at this roster right now, as you said, defensive tackle is far and away the number one thing that Washington needs to add to continue to compete, to, solidify the run defense, which has been the biggest weakness, I would say, with the team so far this season outside of the offensive line. But we knew that. We knew the offensive line was going to be where it was. If they take one, maybe two offensive linemen in the portal, let's see. So I kind of want to break this down real fast because, as we said, 10 to 12, I would say defensive tackle, probably going to take two. That's going to be where I would say the majority of the resources are going to be allocated. You can take that as you will, NIL, time, whatever. That's where it's going to be because we know that's what everybody wants to do. We saw Ole Miss go out and allocate all their time and resources to that this last offseason. They did a good job with that. They got Walter Nolan, Prince Umamalin. They got some really talented players along that defensive line. I would say second on the list for me might be a linebacker, where you want to go get one really productive guy to play next to Kamori House and you can start him to open the season. And then all of a sudden, hey, Zadrius Rainey-Sale is here, Jonathan Epperson, Donovan Robinson, Devin Bryant, Hayden Moore, a lot of these younger guys that are in there. You can have them battle it out to fill out the rotation and go wherever you want to from there. Outside of that, I look at the offense. Yeah, an offensive lineman is going to be in there, one, maybe two, at the premium rate that they're going for. I'm curious to see how that plays out. On top of that, maybe a tight end, probably at least one tight end. You talk about Quentin Moore coming back. That's a huge help. But maybe a Kaleki Latu kind of guy where he's a one and done, has a year left. Maybe the production isn't all the way there, but you like how you can mold him. And still bring along Baron Naone, Charlie Kroll, Ryan Otten, assuming both those last two guys are healthy. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. And then maybe a safety as well, where you can find a way to break down the numbers. But I think the most important thing here, and this is something I have a lot of thoughts on in the third segment as well, is Jedd is getting the full December transfer portal to actually work with.
And that's the whole key here. That's why this is so important, is where it's right. Like, as we're going to keep reiterating, it's like this was a building year, a foundation year, because Jedd was handcuffed from the word go. Like, Kalen, the only difference between Jedd and Kalen is Kalen inherited a Nick Saban roster and Jedd inherited a Kalen DeBoer roster. That's literally the only difference. That's why
picked like the covers bear Kalen DeBoer roster, we might add.
Well, and Kalen DeBoer off a Jimmy Lake recruited team. Let's kind of put the real context there, because that was the other side. And Kalen DeBoer still had the Chris Peterson pieces to work with as well. Right, but again, most of those guys were, but again, Kalen, anyways, beside the point. But with all that being said, but that's why this is so important, because like Jedd basically had to just work with what he got, and there wasn't a ton that he could do. This time, now it's like you're bringing it, and Jedd emphasized also, we're getting 16 mid-year freshmen, so it's about, this is like almost year one now, but with a better, healthier, full off-season setup. And that's the difference here, where Jedd can now go in saying, okay, now I know what we need. I know what to go do and get this and that and this and that. And it's not that he didn't know before. It's just the pickings were so bare, and it's kind of why you had to moneyball it effectively, where it's like you're going to get Enoch in the spring. And most of the transfer portal guys that are starting and making an impact came in the spring, not in December. Like that was the whole point. And the Arizona guys, it was like Russell Davis, like, yeah, he was injured and got hurt. Like Isaiah Ward and some of those other guys. Like Pricelock's probably the most successful Arizona transfer here.
John Coleman.
Oh, it was on defense. Sorry.
Oh, fair enough. But that's the thing. Outside of the spring transfer portal window, the only thing Jedd had access to was the guys who wanted to transfer after a coach left. And I think 100% of those guys that did that, outside of Brian Parham, who no longer on the roster, obviously, came from Arizona. So it's going to look very different. That's something we're going to have so much more on as more players enter, as you and I start to hear things. We're going to have plenty to do on that. But Lars, we got to talk about running back Quaid Carr, who became the second player at the position to join the 2025 class. We've got a message from our friends over at Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals or try to talk sense into an Oregon fan just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless $15 a month. And the longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/lockdowncollege. There you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockdowncollege. That's mintmobile.com/lockdowncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockdowncollege. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower, above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. So Lars, in the middle of recording our show yesterday, we saw that 3-star running back Quaid Carr, who was committed at San Diego State at the time, decommitted. We sent out a note to all our Locked On Huskies insiders shortly after that saying, hey, doesn't feel like it's an if he chooses Washington. It's a when he chooses Washington. After taking an official visit, check out the UCLA game over the weekend, and less than 2 hours later, he'd committed to Washington. This is a guy who goes to Servite High School down in Southern California, and we talked a little bit about some of the fit on yesterday's show, saying, hey, a guy with great speed who Scotty Graham likes to take 2 running backs in each class, had Adam Muhammad, Jordan Washington in 24. Obviously now Julian McMahon and Quaid Carr will be signing in 2025. And this is a guy who you watch his film where he had 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns, I want to say it was, in the Trinity League in Southern California. This dude can fly, man. 10.7 100-meter dash track speed. I love his film. I love his ability to make guys miss. And this is somebody who, especially we've talked about Jonah Coleman's potential return. I would expect him to not necessarily make an impact next year, but this is one of those guys who I don't want to call it a luxury take, but it kind of is that. It's a guy who you love his talent, you love his upside, and you say, hey, not necessarily the hardest guy to get to flip away from, Power 5-ish now going to the Pac-12 with San Diego State, but at the same point, not necessarily the hardest player to try to flip at this point in time, and somebody who you watch that film and you say, yeah, I get it. I love this dude's talent.
It's what we said a lot. Well, we didn't say this because we didn't on the show back then, but it's one of those things during the Chris Peterson era where you look and you see some late takes and late developed the 3-star guys that always end up 2-3 years down the line. It's like, thankfully they took him. It's like, you look at the class like, hey, 4-star. You need to play the 4-star. It's like, right. How many 4-stars don't pan out here? Like, not just at Washington, but just in general. Like, I'm saying there's so many guys. That's why Scotty and this whole staff, really, it's evaluation and development. If some kid pops off midway during his senior year that you had your eye on, you're not going to drop Julian. You're gonna find a way to add and create roster space. And I think that's the important thing is this staff is forward looking. They're not looking back and kind of doing what Kalen did and Jedd did to a degree to the early part of the season, which is, hey, we're going to maximize this current roster in the sense of if you are currently on this roster on a scholarship, we're going to find a way to get you on the field because we need to play everybody. Yeah. And I think in a way Jedd did that to kind of see, well, what do we have? What are we working with? Can some of these guys come back? Or are they just kind of taking up a roster spot? We're not naming names here. We're just pointing that out here. And I think that's what this is because you look at it and say, yes, with Jordan Washington in the room, Adam Muhammad, potentially Jonah, you just go down the list of guys, Julian McMahon, you go down the list of guys in that room next year, you don't necessarily need a running back. It's like need is a strong word here. But same thing with Jordan Washington. It's like, yeah, you already had Adam and Jonah that came from Arizona. Did you need Jordan Washington this year? No. But right. You go get him now, get him on the roster, get him in the program so you don't have to go into the portal in 2-3 years. But hey, come now. Now we got the roster space for you. It's like, no. Get him here now. Get him in the program. Because that's the thing. I also think, to a degree, speaking about his tape, we haven't seen fully what Jedd's offense can do. I think Jedd kind of hinted at that in his press conference where he's like, we might change some things in the offseason because now with DeMond we can do more things. And yada. And it's not a shot at will. It's just fact of the matter.
I'm sorry. That's something that I'm really passionate about is the fact that I don't like, because we talked about it after the UCLA show when I said it on that post-game episode. I said, we haven't seen everything that Jedd's cracked up to be on offense. And part of it just seems to be the playbook is not all there yet. And that's the number one thing. And it's not a shot at Will. It's just, you're going to run different things with a guy who doesn't, as our buddy Jake Butt told us, with a guy who might be the fastest guy on the team compared to Will Rogers, who, all due respect, is not. So with that, you're going to see some different things. You're going to see a lot of different things. And getting a guy like Quaid in the building in this program is exactly that. It's okay. Now we're freed up to, we've seen Jordan Washington on the field for, I believe, exactly one snap this season. And it was a little just reverse on a similar play that Giles Jackson scored on at Indiana to just say, that said a lot to me. That said, hey, we love Jordan Washington. We love his speed, which, Lars, is something you and I have said on the show. Just we've written about. We love his speed. We love everything that this guy can do in space. And I feel a very similar way about Quaid Carr. And when we saw that from Jordan Washington, it's just, hey, this is where the offense is going. It's getting our best athletes into space and letting them make plays with the ball in their hands. We haven't seen a lot of that this season because we've seen a lot of a rhythm NFL pro-style passing game, which is fine because that's the way the offense needs to operate with Will Rogers. You don't need to do that with Damon Williams. You can get way more inventive. You can do a lot of very, very different things, like we talked about on yesterday's show as well. You put all these things together and you look at a player like Quaid Carr and you say, I love his film. This is a very high upside take. You can do a whole lot with this guy and you can be patient. You don't have to, not necessarily like it's very different with Adam Muhammad, where from the first day you and I saw him, that guy's going to play a lot this season. Quaid Carr, all due respect, doesn't have that same frame, that same body type, but you don't need him to. You don't need him to do any of those things. You need to get a guy like that in the program and say, hey, this is a guy who's going to return kicks for us in 2026. Awesome. Is he going to return kicks in 2025? Maybe. Whatever it might be, you just want to get athletes like that into the program by any means necessary, really.
Well, absolutely. And one thing I think that Jedd has learned this season, it's in order to score in the Big Ten, you need to find a few different ways to throw punches where you can't just have, the battering ram, Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad, pound it up the middle. You can't just have the quarterback throw. Like, you got to find some mix, to use a boxing analogy, you got to mix in some combinations. You got to mix, when you go UFC, you got to kick in heel kicks. You got to mix things up a little bit here. And I think that because that's where Jordan Washington is. And you remember talking to Scotty Graham in fall camp, being like, hey, look, Jordan Washington is probably the fastest guy on the team. And we haven't really seen him this season. And I think he was hurt a little bit in the beginning of the season. Sorry, Scotty, I know you don't want to talk about that, but it's one of those things where we've got to call a spade there. But he's overall been healthy, similar to Russell Davis, where it's like, look, it's more about future projection and rate of return than it is, hey, we need to throw this guy on the field here. He's immediately, because I think that's a good thing. But what's funny, you mentioned the game that Jordan Washington got in on. Penn State. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Is it's like it's good that it's not like Eastern Mich, no shot at Eastern Mich, or Northwestern, no shot at Northwestern. We're just getting those types of guys in environments like that, especially with Damon and all that. It's like, hey, like this is building for the future here. And I do want to say the one thing that I'm not disagreeing. I just want to kind of add some context and clarify here. When you said it's not that Damon can't be an NFL rhythm quarterback, because he does need to learn that. He needed to have that base in his thing. That has to be the base of operation. So that's why it was that way. But you can do more off and above that. That's the whole point here. Because Damon, in order to make it to the NFL, which we know he's going to, still has to make NFL throws. Still has to throw the slant. Still has to throw the 10-yard, 12-yard out. Right, exactly. With conviction and not just, oh, hey, he's in shotgun. He can't, easy read, all that stuff. Because those guys don't make it in the NFL. So you have to be able to develop, and Damon has. But then it's also because of Damon's skill set, when he's doing the read option into the boundary, you have a little more faith, and it's not a shot at Will, but it's just like that's why that play was dead from the word go, because you didn't have to account for Will as a blocker. Jake Dickert knew that. I'm just getting this off my chest now because I've been waiting to do this for about 2.5 months here. Jake Dickert knew that Will Rogers wasn't going to run on that play. So automatically that scheme thought of, hey, well, you have to account for an extra blocker is gone the minute Will takes that snap.
And so I like where you're going with this, because you can build on that and you say, all right, just on top of that, where let's say Quaid Carr never becomes a feature back in this offense. Not a shot. I'm just saying that's part of recruiting. Not everybody is going to hit. But what this guy can be I truly feel at the floor is somebody who can return kicks, provide a huge spark on special teams, and just be utilized in a whole bunch of different ways out of the backfield. I saw shout out to Death Row KP on Twitter. He does a great job with some of his film breakdowns and things like that. But he said, hey, I look at this tape and I see Savon Ahmed. And that immediately made me think of early Savon Ahmed, a lot like the way you and I thought Jordan Washington would be used this year, which obviously didn't happen because of, a minor injury here and there, but also the amount of players in front of him. It's a guy who you just find a way to get his speed into space. He's not faster than Jordan Washington. Let's be real about that. But at the same point, you can look at him and say, this is a guy who can be a legitimate playmaker for your offense. And whether it be he gets 5 snaps a game, who cares? You're developing a stable of running backs that's going to work really well for you in the Big Ten with the power players when you think of 2025, again, assuming Jonah comes back. And then Adam Muhammad on top of that. And then you also have that speed element, that Jordan Washington, that change of pace, that Quaid Carr, if you want him to be that. There's so many different ways that you can find a way to utilize a guy like this. The thing you have to do is exactly what they did and get him in the room. And you can wait. You can slow play a recruitment like that and just say, yeah, we know this isn't necessarily going to be the highest recruited guys. And it's not like I asked Scotty in the spring about Adam Muhammad. I said, hey, what was the very first thing that went through your head when you watched Adam Muhammad play and looked at his offer list and everything like that? And he looked at me, he said, shh, don't tell anybody. And I feel like that's kind of the way he was able to play a recruitment like this, because he offered him in March and then, slow played it. He committed somewhere else, but still was able to come back around on him in November and say, hey, we still really want you. We want you to sign with us. And you were able to get that done. But Lars, we spent a lot of time talking about building, talking about the future, demand, all that sort of stuff. We need to address an article written by Jon Wilner. Right after a message from our friends over at Skylight Frames. Are you missing someone this holiday season and want them to be part of your festivities from afar? Well, you need to check out Skylight Frames. We got the perfect gift for you. Skylight Frame is the touchscreen digital photo frame your whole family will love. Upload thousands of photos with your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's so easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. You can add new photos straight from your phone from anywhere. It only takes a tap on your phone to send new photos to a frame across the country. It's the fastest, easiest ways to keep loved ones in the loop. They'll feel so much more connected to you. It looks beautiful in your home. Photos are displayed in HD resolution, and you can choose from 5 different frame styles, set up in portrait or landscape mode, and gift mode makes it a very meaningful, personalized gift. You can preload it with memories without opening the box, surprise them with old sentimental photos as soon as it's plugged in. And now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/college. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/college. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe/college. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and a FanDuel future that you need to go check out. Shout out to Paul Skeens, by the way, long time just show plug there, winning Rookie of the Year. Told you about that one way back as soon as he debuted. Loved that. The Lions to win the NFC after the way they looked against, Jacksonville. I get it, but after the way they looked in that game, you should go check out those odds and so many more over on FanDuel. So Lars, Jon Wilner wrote a very interesting article that he wrote for Mercury News, was published by the Seattle Times on November 19th. And I took a look through it after a friend of mine sent it to me. And I'm not going to lie, I was appalled. He, first of all, there are a whole bunch of points I want to get to in this article. He suggested that Damon Williams would be a hot commodity in the transfer portal, which I just think right off the bat is insane to suggest that he would go anywhere else when Jedd Fish literally dubbed him the future of the program less than a month ago. And I'm sure some people might say, oh, that's just, him just making a ploy to make him stay. I would highly doubt that. On top of that, he said, hey, you look at their record this season, they haven't beaten a team with a winning record. And they've struggled on the road. They haven't won a game away from Husky Stadium. And there's a point that we discussed this in the first segment a little bit. you and I were very high on this team from the start. We said, hey, there's a lot of talent here. We want to see how it comes together. We feel like they can reach 8-4. That didn't happen. But in the same vein, what did you expect from a team that lost over 40 players between the draft and the transfer portal and bringing in an entirely new coaching staff as well? It feels like this article is really short-sighted. And for anybody who, hasn't checked it out, it's over on the Seattle Times. There are a lot of different places you can go find it. But suggesting that Washington is going to, flatter in mediocrity. Another thing he said was, Indiana was the breakout team this year. Next year it could be Nebraska, Wisconsin, USC, whatever. It felt like Washington was just straight up omitted from that conversation when there are so many pieces that the Huskies are getting back. Plus, like we said, without the December transfer portal window last season, this is still a bowl eligible team, which again felt like the minimum for this season, the minimum expectation. But with a whole lot more available to Jedd Fish going into 2025, it feels like Washington should seriously be in the discussion to take a gigantic step forward.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, again, I know we both believe Washington will take that step, get the guys in the portal necessary, the freshmen coming in, the mid-years, all that. We know what's coming. But at least we have a good hunch of what's coming, I should say, just to caveat it. We don't know what's in the building. So right now we don't know what's in the portal. So I'm not going to make any guarantees. But you'd have to bet with Jedd's reputation, selling points, all those sort of things, the improvements that they made in the facilities, all that, Washington is trending in the right direction. Like, they're trending positive. They're going into 25 saying, look, we got a guy who's going to be a 2 or 3 year starter. Jedd thinks 3, I think 2. We'll see what happens. But, with that, shout out to Jedd for believing in 4-year quarterbacks. Shout out to that. But with that being said, it's one of those where, the point about Demond being a hot commodity in the transfer portal is adorable. I love it. Like, I truly actually think it's adorable. Like, I remember seeing those comments after Washington State, after the Apple Cup against Washington State.
Yeah.
That if this story was written back in September, yes, I think that would be accurate because, if Demond doesn't play the full year, if he doesn't have all 10, 11 games, then yeah, you're looking at a quarterback getting benched for a 5th-year guy who maybe hasn't lit the world on fire. And you can kind of make that argument. I see where he's coming from back in September. But now after playing in October and November and Jedd making the declaration, gotta wonder how Shaker Kendall feels. But, just, hey, here we go. Like, this is, Demond is the guy now. That part just doesn't really make sense. And the rest of it, I think, more or less, the way that I kind of read it was, it's people looking at Jedd saying, I don't know if Jedd can really do it. And it's something I mentioned on the show about a month or so ago. He's only got 1 winning season in 4 years. This year could be his second. No, well, it is. Fair. Theoretically, you could lose the next 2 and call it a wrap. Now, again, I don't think it's going to happen. We don't think it's going to happen. But until you get the record, I'm not going to give it to him. But with that being said, but that has to be – there's context added to that. You're taking over a dead Kevin Sumlin program who literally drove that thing into a wall during and after COVID. And then you're talking about, you're also recruiting to Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. Shout out to Brett Brennan for just absolutely ruining a bunch of good players down there this year and wasting a bunch of talent. But that's beside the point. Like really, that is wasted talent down there. It's kind of unfortunate that McMillan couldn't come up and they wanted to stay there and do the right thing. I don't blame the players for that, but it's one of those come on, man. Like, look at imagine if one of those 2 offensive linemen comes and McMillan comes. I think this team is probably 8-9 wins at this point, just with some of those pieces. And so that's, I think, even more to the point where if Jedd had gotten more of his guys, this team would be. And so that the whole article it just kind of reads of, he's like a used car salesman. I don't want to give him any credit. But here's the thing: when Washington goes 10-2 next season, that same headline is going to read, Jedd Fish surprises people. Jedd Fish does this. Jedd Fish lucks out. Jedd Fish does that. It's always the case of, I'm not going to give you credit. I'm just going to couch it with X, Y, and Z reasons why I was not wrong, but nobody was right.
So I see where you're going with there. I think that a big part of this is because, Wilner repeatedly mentions one thing that you and I have talked about that Jedd has said ad nauseum, which is sustained success. That it's all about sustained success, which is, absolutely. That's the name of the game in college football. Like, going from 14-1 to, having to scrape by to be bowl eligible, isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. And you and I would be the first people to admit that. But I feel like you have to just make clear the circumstances where Jedd has said it himself, where, he said, yeah, I took over this job on January 16th. I didn't get the same advantages that a Curt Cignetti at Indiana did. And Curt, fantastic coach, unbelievable job by him. You have to make sure that first and foremost is something you mentioned, especially, just got that $8 million a year extension. That's awesome. You love to see that. But I want to give a shout out to somebody on Twitter, Husky Muse, who did a really good job of putting together Washington's last 10 just classes nationally, just like where they rank nationally. Lars, we know that 2019 and 2020 were the two best. 2018 as well, where those classes finished 16, 15, and 17 respectively. Jedd Fish's class right now is ranked 18th. And that's not everything. We know that that's not everything, but it's about acquiring talent as much as you possibly can. And Jedd Fish and his coaching staff have shown a willingness to do that. We talked about that all week long. We talked about them still pursuing where, if they get Donovan Olubade and Andrew Marsh or one of the two, that's going to help, level up this class. Yeah, please. That'd be awesome. That's going to help level up this class. The transfer portal, that's going to help level up this class, where Jedd made a big promise and he said, hey, I want this to be the best recruiting class in UW history. He's going to need to make a few big moves to get it there, because 15 right now, that is the highest. It's still within reach. I don't know if he's going to reach it. It's going to take a lot in the transfer portal, but you look at everything that he's been able to do from a talent acquisition standpoint and everything he's been able to do with this season this year, where, you look at the situation he's placed in, and we've said it. We said it when we were doing our preseason predictions, that this was always going to be a bridge year, no matter what. But to just come out and say, oh, yeah, no, UW's mediocre, like that, they're never going to get back to where they were. I think that that's insane. I think that's honestly just disrespectful of this program, because you can look at everything that's going on and you can say it's building. It's building. You knew what it was going to be when you look at what this roster is and you watch them play and you say, all right, I see a building block here. I see a building block there. You look at the offensive line. You can look at Decker DeGraff. You can look at receiver, Damon Williams, whatever it is that you want to say, and you say, all right, there are young players at that position that you can be really excited about. So I truly just think that's insane.
And we mentioned sustained success, 20-0 at home the last 3 years. You kept that thing going. Like, right. of the things that mattered, you kept it going. And yeah, I mean, who's going to win that many games on the road when with the same circumstance, right? Oregon, obviously, still undefeated, all that. So yeah, teams are winning on the road, but by this time next year, I'd be surprised if Jedd has more than one road loss. Honestly,
fair enough.
I think there could be also a home loss in there. Unfortunately, I'm not guaranteeing it, but I think that's where the trade-off comes in. But all those pieces are still building right there. So yeah, it's a little weird shot, but also I'm not surprised.
I'm 100% with you there, but we got to get out of here for the day. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support, and thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast. With that being said, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell, so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.